Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the VOV Network. We are here live once again on Saturday morning. Mina and I say good morning, Mina,
Good morning.
or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, right?
Yes.
So, thank you for joining us. On this week's episode, we're going to be focusing on a very interesting topic, and just from an educational standpoint, as well as a lot of times people don't even know what it is. They've observed it. Sometimes it might even be out delivering these types of behaviors. But what we're going to be looking at is passive aggression and talking about that in a good bit of depth and detail as we go through today's session. A couple of things we wanted to cover before we get started. Mina, you want to share about the chat and how we want to manage that today?
Yes, we have a chat. So if you have something you want to say, please put it out there. We'll acknowledge what you're saying. I'm monitoring the chat. So please join us.
Excellent. Thank you. And also, when you do put a comment or something in the chat, it only shows us either that you're coming in from YouTube or from Facebook. It does not actually show
That's
your
right.
name. So if you're willing to share your name, put that as part of your comment too, so we know where the comment came from.
Yeah.
We greatly appreciate it. All right, so let's dive into it. Passive aggression. I guess one of the big things that comes up when we talk about that is, first of all, what is it? In specific detail. So we're going to talk about the definition of it here in just a second. And then we're going to obviously walk through, give some examples of what passive aggression looks like. And from there, you'll probably see, oh, yeah, I've observed that or experienced that, or maybe even been the person being passive aggressive.
Right, right,
Well,
right.
yeah. A lot of times I said, you don't know what you don't know. So be it. Uh, so let me bring in the presentation here and we'll get started. All right. So as I said, today's session, we're going to be talking about overcoming passive aggression. We're going to start by taking a look at what the definition at a high level, but still so you understand what passive aggressive or passive aggression is. All right. So we'll start with that. Bring that up for us here. All right. So definition of passive aggression. So I got two different definitions here. One came from psychologytoday.com. The second was from the mayoclinic.org. So passive aggression is a way of expressing negative feelings such as anger or annoyance indirectly instead of directly. Passive aggressive behavior is often difficult to identify and it can sabotage relationships both at home and at work. And that's very true. So we're going to get into that in quite a bit more detail. Um, Second bullet point says passive aggressive behavior is a pattern of indirect expression of negative feelings instead of openly, and that's one of the big keys, addressing them. Uh, there's a disconnect between what the passive aggressive person says and what he or she actually does. And that's such a big part of it, because it's you're saying and you're acting in one particular direction, well, and then the opposite side of it, uh, totally not how you are actually responding, or the actions that you're showing. It's just not congruent at all. So very different from that standpoint. So let's go on to the next slide. And here, this is talking about the four common characteristics. And Mina, you want to kind of go over that for everybody?
Yes, so we're talking about behavior. We're not really talking about clinical diagnosis of anything. So just remember that because we
Hmm.
all can have a bit of the passive aggressive behavior at times and thinking maybe that's a good way to work out a solution to a
Yeah.
problem or issue or relationship issue. So most chronically passive aggressive individuals have four common characteristics. So let's talk about these four characteristics. So they can be unreasonable to deal with. So a good example of that would be um, someone who has issues expressing their desires and not getting their needs met, right? So they might maybe lash out or just this just might be the way that they communicate on a
Hmm.
regular basis. Uh, so being assertive is getting your needs met without crossing someone's boundaries or offending some on someone their rights. So the desire is to be assertive, right? But
Hmm.
people will communicate passive aggressively. So let's go to the next point. They can be uncomfortable to experience. So that's on both sides. It's not just on the person receiving the behavior.
Hmm.
It can be uncomfortable for the person that is they're experiencing discomfort in this situation because someone is maybe crossing their boundaries or um, that's this is their normal way of expressing their their desires in
Hmm.
that way. So they're not the devil, you know. They're not the devil. I have a soft spot in my heart for people like that. I don't know why, but I do experience lots of friends and such like that. So let's go to the next point. They rarely express their hostility directly, and Brian did say that earlier. So they may be uncomfortable with um, hostility or confrontation.
Confrontation.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so with that, they might express themselves through being passive aggressive. Um, they repeat the subterfuge behavior over time. So subterfuge is deceit used in order to receive one's goals. So like I said, they have needs they need met, but they won't come up with it directly with the person. So
Hmm.
I can give you an example of something. I have neighbors. They have a second parking place they never use. People love to park in that parking space because it's never used, right? And they
Hmm.
need it, right? So
Hmm.
what happens is they'll put their garbage can or recycle bin, which is pretty big, pretty hefty, put it in the parking space to keep people from parking there instead of addressing the issue with whoever it is that parks there. There's one guy
Hmm.
that parks there a lot. So instead of addressing it with him or not even addressing it with him, going to management and saying, hey, this individual is always parking in my
Within my
spot.
spot.
Can you please help me with it or whatever? Instead, they put the can in there. But that's the problem is that they don't want to experience whatever hostility comes with it or confrontations. They don't want to deal with that. So it's easier to just put the can out there and just give them a subliminal message, hey, don't park in my spot.
Hmm.
But that doesn't work because people will still park in it.
Yeah. The day the can's not there, people are
Yes.
going to park there,
Or
right?
or they can get out of their car and move the can and park.
My
They
park.
can just move it up on the grass
Fair
and
enough.
park.
That's a good point too. Yeah.
So if you don't take care of these things, your needs still are not met. So
Right.
I'm just saying those are some examples.
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I'm done with that slide.
All right, awesome. So we'll move to the next slide. Before we dig into that, though, I want to kind of go back to what Mina was saying, especially that last piece. That is a classic example of passive aggressive
Yeah.
behavior because instead of actually taking the action, because I mean, it's their space, so they have a right to protect it, right? It's
Right,
their
right,
parking
right.
space, right? But how they're going about defending that right is in a very passive aggressive
It
manner,
is. It really is.
which, as you said, it doesn't actually solve the issue.
Mm-mm.
So it's just going to continue to boil on and boil on and
Yeah,
boil on because you're very indirectly
yeah.
trying to resolve it. And that's
And
the whole point with passive aggressive behavior.
And sometimes in these situations, people don't read minds. Now,
Right.
that's obvious they don't want someone to park in their spot. But
Right.
sometimes in passive aggressive situations, the person you're trying to get the point across to
Hmm.
doesn't even know that that's it, or they have their own response that can
Right.
be passive aggressive also. So
They might just sit there. Hey, that's a great idea. Put your trash bin in the parking space because that way it's not at your apartment, right? I don't
right,
know.
right.
They don't
Oh,
not even
wait, wait,
relating that it's about not parking in my space.
wait, wait, wait. I gotta say this. A lot of the people in my area keep their can out on the street and
Right?
take the garbage to the can instead of keeping it over by their place. It's
By the
crazy.
place,
But
right?
yeah, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, totally get it.
Yeah. I'm
So
just
now
saying
let's
I'm done with
transition a little bit. We actually move from we've looked at the definition, we've looked at some of the characteristics that they may have. Now let's actually talk about how that translates into behaviors, the physical actions, whether it's a physical action or how they may speak or present themselves or carry themselves. And these are just some of the most common ones. There are obviously a longer list than this. One of the ones that you probably have heard or seen from a passive aggressive standpoint is they brood in silence, or they kind of have this simmering resentment. and you can almost sense it, right? When someone is in that mode, but they won't say anything, right? And it's like, what's going on with that, right? And that's one of
Can you
the
see? Can you see in the relationships of husband, wife, spouse,
yeah,
uh, uh, dating relationship or whatever? This brooding, the silence, the simmering, and you know something's wrong, but you don't know what you did,
right,
or
right,
you know what you did, but you're stubborn. You This is the way I
right.
live. You know.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. It's great you bring up the
Yeah.
being stubborn piece of it
Mhm.
because I have a great story I'm going to share in a little
Okay,
bit
good.
after we get to
Looking
the end of
for
this that kind of
stubborn.
summarizes a lot of these, and you go, oh, okay, now I really understand what this is all about, right? All right, so let's move on to the next bullet point. So, false promises, procrastination, or making excuses. So, basically, that's what that first slide when it was given the definition, and it was talking about um, what they say and what they actually do. It just
Not
doesn't line
the
up. The
same,
things
right?
don't match, right?
Hmm.
So, making excuses. That's the whole woe is me, the world, COVID caused it and I can't do it. I can't make it work. You're pointing, everything is outward as far as why it's not happening or not getting done, right?
Yeah.
So that type thing. And again, false promises makes perfect sense. Yes, I'm going to do this. And yes, I'm going to do this. Yes, I'm going to do this. And you never do it. So why make the promise to begin with if you know that your intent is never to actually do it, right? So that's another piece of it.
Then again, maybe it's not their intent to not do it. Maybe they thought they could, but that person with the passive aggressive behaviors may not understand that if they don't speak up, the person will never be able to tell them.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Mhm.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
Next bullet point on here is blame shifting or victimhood. Again, that kind of leads back to the making excuses one, where it's like, oh yeah, it's that fault, their fault, his fault.
Hmm.
Everybody's
Hmm.
causing it to happen, but taking
Right.
responsibility for your own actions and your own behavior.
Yeah.
That's an important piece of it. So they always shift the blame or
Hmm.
play the victim role in it versus
Right.
owning up to it, right?
Hmm.
Negative humor and cutting sarcasm. And this was an interesting one because it kind of ties back to our session from last week when we were talking about um, the work scenario where you were talking about the culture of it.
Yes.
It was just bad jokes and very
Yeah.
crass and all that kind of stuff, right?
Hmm.
So this is another thing that people with passive aggressive behaviors do is they will use just a real biting, cutting type humor,
Mean spirited, right?
mean spirited. Um, not able to express themselves in any other way, but just trying to, I don't know, knock you down kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Look, a thousand cuts, as they say, right? Kind of
Right.
thing,
Hmm.
which is never a good thing, especially the person receiving it. They can really belittle you. And then last one here is deliberate obstruction or hidden sabotage, and that goes back to the bullet point that Mina referenced a little while ago. Um, they intentionally don't deliver so that it has an impact or limits whatever is there. And this happens in relationships, at home, but it's
Hmm.
definitely something that is very prevalent in the work environment.
Yes, definitely.
You know, you have a timeline, you need to meet a certain thing needs to be completed
Yes.
by a certain time. And there's 5 team members working on different pieces and parts of it.
Hmm.
And there's one team member that, doesn't like the other team member. So I'm going to sabotage this whole
Right.
thing so that it doesn't look good, right? Because it
Right.
not understanding that it actually impacts everybody in the group, but they're taking that passive aggressive behavior and having
Hmm.
supposedly directed at one individual, but actually
Hmm.
ends up hurting more than just that one person. So a definite issue that you can have with that. I mean, any of these you want to cycle back on before we
Yeah,
go forward?
I was thinking about the deliberate obstruction and hidden sabotage, like in work environments, like maybe that person's the boss and you feel like
Mm-hmm.
you could do better than them, or you don't want them to succeed, but you do things that you say the wonderful things, but your actions are not supporting to the organization or the boss. Everything you see up front might be okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the background, there's that sabotage, and it's hurting them also, but they don't realize that. I've seen that.
Correct. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. So I want to tell a little bit of a story. I was actually I was on YouTube or whatever last weekend, and I happened to be streaming a church service. I was listening to the minister speak, and he gives this story. And I said, oh, I got to write that down because that is a perfect story for what our topic was going to be this week with the passive aggressive behavior. So he's telling a story of a husband and wife, and it's a Sunday night or whatever, and they're about to get ready to go to bed. They've had an argument throughout the day. So they're now in this, as this bullet point here says, they're in this brooding silence mode, right? So they're not speaking to each other. It's like whoever, there's this war of silence. So whoever speaks first loses kind of thing is where they are in this whole process. So they're preparing for bed in the evening, and the wife gets into bed first. He's still milling around doing a few things because he actually has a business trip. The next day needs to catch a flight in the next morning. So realizing that and realizing that his wife is normally a very early riser, he says, it'll be good if she can wake me up and make sure I catch my flight in the morning. However, how he goes about doing that is not to break that silence. He writes her a note. Please wake me up at 5 a.m. and leaves it on her side of the bed. Goes to bed, wakes up the next morning. When he pops up out of the bed, looks around to see what time it is. It's 8 a.m. Obviously, he missed his flight. Highly upset now with his wife, writes, where is she? I got to go. And as he's, raising up to get out of the bed and leave the room to go find her to express his unhappiness, he notices there's a note on his side of the bed. And the note says, it's 5 a.m. Time to get up. So the irony of that is, they're both being passive aggressive, and they get into, and we'll see it on the next slide when we get there, this tit for tat scenario. And that is one of the things that just plays out huge in a lot of different situations where you start to have passive aggression go on. So neither one of them wanted to break silence because they didn't want to lose the war of silence. And then you end up in this tit for tat scenario, which impacts everyone, right? Because
he missed his flight.
Right? But she left him a note, which is the same thing he did to her the night before, right?
She did what he did.
Yeah, she did what he did.
Stubborn,
right? So let's move on to the next slide. All right, so better ways to interact with a passive-aggressive person is what the next slide is about. And you'll see on here that as I was talking about, tit for tat is mentioned, but one of the biggest ones is the first bullet point. And I know, we'll talk in detail about a few of these. Don't overreact. And I think that's, a big piece of it. And then that follows on with reduce the personalization or misunderstanding of it. A lot of the times people who are acting passive aggressive are not necessarily specifically aiming it at you. And that's the thing you have to realize. That is just a behavior pattern that they have. So you, as the person who's receiving this passive aggressiveness, have to understand that, don't overreact to it, because it might not necessarily be you that they're aiming it at. They just have no other way or clear or clean way to express whatever it is they're feeling at that particular point in time. So you end up getting caught in the crossfire of it all. So not reacting or overreacting right away is a good piece of it, because then that's when you start going with the back and forth, right?
Yeah.
Keep your distance whenever possible. So sometimes, as you said, you can sense that this person is in this brooding, whatever mood that's about. So giving them some time and some space to simmer back down, I guess, and maybe become a little more pliable to want to engage and maybe to want to talk about it at that point in time. So take a step back versus being more confrontational, because typically when you go head to head with it, then it gets worse. Go ahead, Mina.
Unless you're mean. Because giving them space is difficult. Giving them space when, this is happening. They've done this passive aggressive thing. I don't want to give you space. I want to find out what the heck's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that doesn't necessarily make the situation better, but I'm just saying. I'm just being honest.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not
that's
gonna
true,
wave you in
right?
the face, but you
So
should. But I'm
no,
not
but
gonna
that's a
wave you.
good point. So let's talk a little bit about that. So because that's a great point.
Yeah.
They in this, you always have to remember whether it's a home relationship, whether it's a work relationship, social
Mhm.
friends, out there in your social circle, whatever it may be, there are always two different personalities or
Yeah.
more involved in this interaction. So as we filter through these different things, you do have to put your personality
Yeah.
into how you would address this. And that's exactly what Mina is saying, because she knows that her personality is like, wait, I sense something's wrong.
What's
I'm
going
gonna go
on?
dig. I'm gonna go try to figure out what it is. Right. That's you gotta, yeah, exactly. Other people's personalities, they might just let it boil for a while, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't want the potential of confrontation or that kind of thing, right? So they prefer to just, okay, well, we'll stand back and we'll see how it
Give
goes.
them a minute.
So you do have to bear that in mind as we talk about all of these things. And again, with these, we're not clinical psychologists or anything like that. We are just making you aware of how these things can play out and
Right.
process within the different relationships, and better ways for you to be able to manage your own personal behaviors and your interactions and how you respond and react when you are in those situations, right?
Right. Right.
All right, next bullet point, don't try to change them. And obviously, yes, we do want that behavior
Yeah.
to start to change, right? And that's not what this is saying. What they're talking about here is um, try in the moment, when they are in that moment of having this brooding passive aggressive behavior, whatever it might be, that's not the time to try to have that conversation about
Mm.
changing, because their mind space is just not in the right place for that. So that's a very important one to consider as well. Don't get sucked in and avoid tit for tat. And that's exactly what happened in my story, right? Is they had this argument. They're in this space of, I'm not, well, he's not speaking to me, so I'm not going to speak to her. Blah, 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 blah. So, and then
She did exactly what he asked her to do.
she did. He left her a note, says, "Wake me up at." She left him a note that says, "It's 5 a.m. Wake up."
But that
However,
is the tit for tat.
that
She
is
knew she wasn't really waking him up, right?
right. Right.
Mhm.
So the consequence of that are there, right, from that standpoint. And that's the tit for tat piece of it.
Mhm.
Uh, next point on there is give the passive aggressive person a chance to help solve the problem. So basically, it kind of ties back to the one about don't try to change them in the moment,
Yep.
um, and also not overreacting. Sometimes you have to let them, as I said, simmer back down, right? So they're not at that boiling point, or whatever's got them on edge. Then they become a little more realistic about what's happening or whatever the situation might be. And then they might actually start to solve or start the interaction to solve the
Right.
problem themselves
Right.
versus having to have the confrontation or interaction with that. So that's the key, from how you, as the person receiving that behavior, can kind of help uh, alleviate some of the confrontation, bring it down.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to tell one more story, because this is one of my favorite stories about passive aggressive. Again, it is a husband and wife situation, and COVID changed our lives for a lot of people, right? So it was a husband and wife, both professionals, and both had careers. As when COVID kicked in, they work lives changed. His job said 100% you work from home. We don't want you to come to the office. And for the wife, what she did, she was in healthcare, so she had some days she needed to go in, some days she stayed home. So the work dynamics changed from that standpoint. So he's now at home all the time. She's in and out of the house at different times for work. So one of the things that they had a discussion about, okay, you're at home all of the time now. How about you make sure X gets done and Y gets done because you're here, right? One of those things was something as simple as taking the trash bag out of the thing in the kitchen, getting it out to the trash bin and throwing it away. Trash pickup in their neighborhood was every Monday and Friday morning. So that means Sunday at some point in time for sure, and Thursday at some point in time for sure. You should at least get the trash out of the house, out to the curb. A few weeks of this goes by, and he's hit or miss on it. So
Mm.
one Sunday, she's brooding over the fact that The trash is still in the bin, right? But doesn't say anything. Does not communicate to him, but they've already had the discussion. So what she does then, she takes the trash bag out of the trash bin, plops it right in the middle of the floor in the kitchen, right? Leaves it there. She proceeds to go upstairs, get ready for bed because she has to work the next day. He will work the next day, but he's working from home. So he's still sitting downstairs watching TV, whatever he's doing. He comes in the kitchen to grab a snack, grab something to drink, whatever. Dances right around that bag, dances right back around it, back to the couch. Totally ignores it, right? Does not take it out. So he proceeds a little bit later to go upstairs, and there's this aura in the room of, doors slamming and huffing and puffing from her because she knows he hasn't done it. But still won't say, could you just take out the trash? I mean, this is passive aggressive behavior that's going on. He knows that he's poking the bear by because he obviously saw the bag. He danced right around it. Right. So it's tit for tat. So they go to bed. She has to get up early and leave to go. She gets up, comes downstairs. The bag obviously is still sitting in the middle of the floor in the kitchen. Right. So what does she do on her way out of the door? She takes the trash bag, takes it to his office in home, and puts it in his chair. And she proceeds out of the door. So when he comes down to go to work the next morning, he walks into his office space, and what is that smell? And then the trash bag sitting there in his chair.
Smart.
So again, just one of those things. So obviously now he's angry, and and how that all played out in the long term, I really don't know. But the whole point of that is anywhere in that scenario, someone could have been more clear about what their expectation was. Please, can you just and both were guilty in that scenario, right? Because he knew exactly what
he did. He knew.
He knew. There was no question that but he kept. I'm going to poke the bear. I'm going to poke the bear, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
But those are classic examples of what we mean by passive aggression or passive aggressive behavior, and how they can be very detrimental in relationships of all kinds, right? Whether it's your family, whether it's romantic relationships, definitely work, coworkers, and even in your social circle. And there are people who tend to react in that way for many different reasons. A lot of the times it is just to avoid confrontation, right? Some people just are uncomfortable with it. Others just kind of have a mean streak sometimes, right? And how do
he could have took that trash out once she put it in by the can in the kitchen, wherever. He could have took it out, and they still could have had the conversation about it after that, like later that day when she got home from work. We could talk about this, and talk about it calmly, and I think they would have had a better result than him doing tit for tat.
Right. Exactly. And that's the thing. And that's that. If there's a bullet point on this slide, I think that's the most important one.
Yeah.
It is that tit for tat, avoiding that, because that is the escalation point. That's all you're doing when that starts to happen. Now you're escalating it further and further up the ladder, and doing more harm than good as you do that. Because but that's a natural thing that we do. We start to dig in, right? Oh, I'm gonna stand my ground. As you said a few moments ago about being stubborn, right?
Yes. You think you want to do it? I can do it one better.
Right. But what do you really gain?
Nothing
by doing that, right?
Well, you might get a little laugh out of it, but
maybe
you can't control people. So
True.
What is he going to do back when you do it? So
right. Exactly. I totally agree with that 100%. So let's move on to the next slide. All right. So this brings us to the VOV question of the day. And that is, are you guilty of these types of behaviors in your relationships? I see Mia's hand is going up. I might have to own up to some of that. So yeah, I am guilty in some ways. My side of it is I don't like two things. Overly aggressive people coming at me. I try to avoid that. And then I I'm not necessarily one who likes to have a lot of confrontation. So there are times when I'll just step back and acquiesce, which is in a way actually still being passive aggressive, because maybe I do have something I want to say or I want to share, or I feel a certain way about a certain thing, but I don't say anything
Mhm.
out of not wanting to have that quote unquote confrontation. Right?
Yeah.
And this is
Mhm.
that's why we're doing this today. Is it's about self-awareness. It's about having
Right.
you think it through. What am I, how am I responding in these different situations, and why am I responding in those ways, and is how is that playing out from a behavior standpoint. And for me, that is the one that I know I'm definitely guilty of.
Yeah.
What about you, Nina?
Yeah, I can agree with both those points. At sometimes I can be passive aggressive is with that aggression coming towards me,
Mm-hmm.
but more than likely I'm going to speak up if they're aggressive. But there might be behaviors they're not really necessarily being aggressive. It just might be how they run their life, how they communicate, and it's not working for me. And for me, I think the best thing to do is to speak up. And but maybe not too soon. Take my time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Mm-hmm.
not right then. Maybe I need to wait a minute because I'm I'm angry, right? Or irritated or whatever, and what comes out my mouth might not be what I really meant. And then sometimes people have underlying desires or issues or problems that drive them to react in the way they do, or not necessarily react, but to act in the way they do, to go and be passive aggressive because there's this thing or these things, and you just never really know unless you talk about it. Like for me, I don't like anyone to reference or make any type of action that makes me look stupid or what I think makes me look stupid. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
trigger for me. Me stupid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I might react in a passive aggressive way or even just straight up angry or aggressive because someone's trying to make me look stupid where that's my trigger.
Right.
But I'm
Right.
not stupid and everybody knows I'm not stupid, but if you go in that way, it you'll get that reaction.
Right. And that goes back to the very first thing when you go back to that slide talking about the characteristics that you see.
Mm-hmm.
That's the subterfuge, right?
Right.
Because they
Mm-hmm.
are intentionally trying to
Yeah.
undercut you,
Yeah.
right? To make you look a certain way
Yeah.
so that then they look a certain way,
Right.
right?
Right. 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 Hmm.
You know. And
And
yeah,
then they'll get that reaction, or I might go silent, but then I might do some passive aggressive stuff, right?
right.
Because
Right.
you're trying to make me look stupid. Let me show you how to make me look stupid, and then
Right.
you look stupid. You know, so
Right.
it's tit for tat. Then, so
Right.
I'm just saying, we all have our moments or our areas where we can be that way.
Right. And that's actually the whole point, or part of the point for today, is we're not saying that, you can't have these types of behaviors, because it's kind of
There you
human
won't
nature.
either.
Yeah, it's kind of what makes us up, and kind of how we
Yeah.
tick. What we're talking about, or how we were focused in today, is just helping you understand it, see it, process through it.
Mhm.
Because it's not that you probably will never do these behaviors. Most
Yeah.
likely you will, because it's some of it's embedded in you. There's, as you
Yeah.
said, for me, I know the whole confrontation thing. It just
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to change in my personality setup
Right. Right.
at
Right.
this point in time. But being aware of it, I can try to manage it better or differently. Right?
Yeah.
Can't get rid of it,
Right.
but I can certainly try to manage it in better ways. And
Right.
that's really what we wanted to
Right.
express and show today. Right?
And that starts with understanding it, knowing
That's
what it's about. Right.
understanding what it's about. Right?
Hmm.
And that was, so what we're trying to do is just kind of at a
Educate.
very high level but very specific
Hmm.
way help you understand
Hmm.
what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, whether it's you putting it out or whether it's you receiving it, because
Yeah.
there are two sides to it, right?
Instead of he just acts funny. I don't like the way he is.
Yeah,
Instead of that kind of thing. Well, this is what it is. And if you understand it, you can make better relationships. And we're about cultivating, enhancing, and having better relationships, right? So that's
correct,
why we're here talking about this.
exactly. Excellent point. That's the question for today. Just to kind of process that through for yourselves out there and ask, do you display outwardly these types of behaviors in your relationship? Maybe sometimes it's just a mindset that you have, and how you react to certain things, and now maybe this will help you clue in on why you're in those particular situations and how you react to it. And
I'm
then
looking to see if
as the
there's
person receiving this, now you have a better feel for where they may be coming from and how to not get in that tit for tat and that side of it as well. um, I think that's all we have for today, Mina. Anything else you
yeah.
want to add or share before we
I
wrap
was
up?
looking to see if there's any comments maybe we didn't see, but I don't see any comments.
Yeah, I don't show any there either.
That's only on Facebook though. I didn't look on or on YouTube to see.
Got it.
Can I
All
look?
right, well, I will hide that from the world. Good session today, and as I said,
Yeah, yeah.
I
Good
think
information.
the stories that we talked about, whether it's the husband and wife and
Yeah.
leaving the notes, or how it's something as simple as taking
Trash.
out the trash can lead to World War III. But that is the essence of what passive aggression and passive behavior is, and how we need to be more aware and just be better at addressing it, because it's not going to go away. It's out there in the world.
No, it's
People,
there.
it's how we communicate sometimes, but
Could
we
be
just do a
cultural.
better job of actually expressing what it is we're feeling versus acting in a certain way. And another one that came up, was talking about the whole, it's like mind reading. It's like, you don't know what I'm
Yeah.
thinking or what I'm feeling. And it's like, well, I may have an idea, but then I may also be misinterpreting it.
You
Right.
might.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how about you just express what it
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
you're feeling or thinking at that moment in time, right? But we're so guilty of expecting the other person to be able to just uh, figure it out. I guess I don't know how that all plays out. Um, but yeah, just very interesting how those things work out. So we'll get anyway. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that trash thing might be common. I have a friend that happened with. That's what she did too, but it's a little different scenario. But she
Hmm.
also did the same thing. So I think that trash thing might be an issue in relationships at the home. But
Yeah, it's kind of
I,
something, but you said it's such a simple thing. We all, I mean, even
I
technically, it's not even something she should have to say when you think about it in that
right.
scenario, because trash day, meaning when they come pick up the trash outside,
Yeah.
is every Monday and every Friday. So
Right. Why
the
can't you get
logical
that?
sequence then would be, okay, trash guys coming tomorrow morning. The smart thing to do
Put
would
it
be
out.
get the trash out of the house, right? I mean, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
Um, but for whatever reason, how we react and it's, you're not the boss of me. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's it. That's it right there. That's that. See, that's what I was talking about when I said there's some underlying stuff. That's it right there. You're
Yeah.
not the boss of me. And I think not just for trash, but for many situations, you're not the boss of me. I got a friend that told me one time, and it was funny. I laughed it off. It didn't cause problems or anything.
Right.
But he said, I left my mom at home from the
Right.
state he came from.
Right.
He left his mom there. You ain't my mom, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But and it wasn't a problem for me. I laugh about it, but yeah, those
Yeah.
sometimes you get it in your head. Like I could have taken that and said, what, why are you having that? And then we could have, had our tit for tat going after that. Could have been an argument or anything. But for me, it was funny. I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? He's right. For what I said to him, he was right. So yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
So
No, that's a
it's like
great
an
point.
argument.
And I've heard that comment before, but
Yeah.
you're not my mom, or yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, so people
But that's
again,
it. That's it right there.
right? So, but that's the whole digging in, right? For
Yeah.
whatever reason, we have a lot of the times we feel like, oh, I'm gonna be stubborn. I'm gonna dig in on this moment,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and instead of expressing that verbally, what it
Yeah.
is or what's really going, what your thought process
Right.
is behind
Right.
it,
Right.
you show it in these behaviors, right?
Right.
um,
Mhm.
and they tend to be indirect. It's the
Yeah.
whole, why is she slamming doors, or what? Why is he doing this out in the yard? Or,
Yeah, yeah,
instead of just talking about whatever the
right.
true issue is, right? So
And
it's
don't forget text messages.
uh,
Text messages, don't assume anything because you can get someone totally wrong because you're not hearing their voice or the inflection of their voice. They didn't mean that. They
right,
meant something else.
right,
Or yeah, you
yeah,
if you're not communicating face to face. And even then, so if we get it messed up in face to face, you're definitely gonna get it messed up in text messages.
yeah, yeah.
Just saying.
And that's a great point you bring up text messages, because text messaging is also it's a brief communication tool.
Yeah.
And I see people try to have conversations, and when I say
Yeah.
conversations,
Yeah.
through text message,
Yeah.
and just not a good idea, because as you just
Right.
mentioned,
Hmm.
you can't see the expression and the emotion necessarily
Right. You
in that
cannot.
text message, right? So hearing the voice, even if
Yeah,
so,
it's
a phone call
important.
or in person is even better, because you get
Yeah.
body language on top of
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
But yeah, all of that plays into how the behavior is
Yeah.
interpreted, right? So text messages is the worst, to be upset with someone, and then
Yeah.
that's how the interchange happens. So
Yeah.
it's a terrible medium for that, because you lose so
But
much of
it's
the person.
common. It's
Oh,
really common
it
these
is.
days that people don't talk to each other. They don't get on the phone and talk to each other. It's that it's so easy to carry on a conversation by text and keep doing what you're doing, or maybe you got people around that you live with or whatever. You don't want them hearing your conversation, or whatever it is. It's common. And
It's
so
very
people need
common.
to understand you need that face to face. You need that talking on the phone, because you need to hear that voice and know, if you're on the same page.
Absolutely. And technically, especially if it's an issue that's being talked about via the text
Mm-hmm.
conversation,
Yeah.
that is actually a form of passive aggressive,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
you're really minimizing the confrontation, because there's no
Right.
face to face, there's not even a
Right.
phone call.
Right.
So it's you're actually being in a certain way. I
Right.
have a problem with this. I want to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
But then you choose to want to talk about it via text message. You kind
Yeah.
of have already defeated the whole point
Right.
of
The
having the conversation,
understanding.
right?
But
Yeah.
sometimes people don't know it's an argument because it's
Hmm.
by text.
But
They don't know it's an argument. They don't know the person isn't agreeing. They don't know it's sarcasm. They don't know what it really is because it's by text. They
by
think they
text,
know and they assume, and then they get back. What are you talking about?
right?
Or get back, oh, I didn't mean that. I meant this.
Right.
Or don't include typos and the autocorrects. Oh, that's a whole nother subject. You can
that
autocorrect yourself into
we,
issues.
we won't get into the whole autocorrecting typos. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right, right.
I've sent some messages and people are like, "Whoa, what did I
Oh,
say? Or what? I didn't say it. The
oh,
phone said
that
it. I swear."
Apple phone.
Yeah. And again, but that all leads to the miscommunication
Right.
of the whole situation and how
Hmm.
it's interpreted and perceived. And we had a talk last week when we were speaking. We talked about perception versus reality, and
Hmm.
even that ties back into
Yeah.
the behavior and how things are received, right?
Yeah.
So all of that kind of is woven
Yeah.
together. The main thing is, and even our subject from last week, uh, and then tying it from authenticity to this is
Yeah.
still tied together, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you have an issue but you're expressing it passive aggressively,
Mhm.
you're not really being true to yourself, because you're
Right,
not
right, right.
standing up for self in the way you should, right?
Yeah.
Um,
There's no
so
resolution
there's
either.
thank you. That is a great
Yeah.
word. There is no resolution. That's a very key point to that.
Hmm.
So we're going to kind of wrap up for today. Definitely, if you got any value from what we talked about today, and this helps you in any way, be sure to like and subscribe. Again, we're going to be
Right.
doing sessions each Saturday, various topics. Topic for next week: ghosting,
Ghosting.
or being ghosted, and that promises to be a very interesting discussion.
Interesting.
Just a phenomena that's kind of crazy right now. So we're going to
Yeah.
dive into that and get a better feel for what that's all about.
Hmm.
Um, but definitely like, subscribe. Again, we stream weekly to our YouTube channel. the VOV network there, and then also our Facebook group, which is the VOV network group. And then you can also see it on our regular Facebook page, which is the VOV network page. So we're streaming to all 3 locations live at the same time. And if you do miss the live stream, it's recorded, and you can always go back and play it back a little bit later. And also on top of that, now we're taking the audio from all of our streams, and we're doing them as a podcast. So you can find our podcast, which is the audio of these streams, on all of the normal podcast outlets. So Apple, Google, Spotify, and Amazon Music also. So any of those 4 locations you can actually download and listen to a podcast recording of the sessions too. So lots of different resources to be able to continue to follow and track along with us on this journey. We greatly appreciate it. Mina, what are your final thoughts for today?
Well, I was just thinking it might be important to say, which is the reason why we read the bullets on the slides, because if it's a podcast, we want them to hear what we're showing you on the lives. So they can hear the bullet statement, and then we respond on what we're going to say about it. But that's important that they know what's on the slides.
Yep. And then as you do watch the video playback, or if you're watching it live, definitely leave us a comment about any future topics you'd like to hear us talk about. Because again, as we've said, this is all about everybody out there and how we can help share information, share our knowledge, share our experiences. That just helps everybody be better at interacting and being better in their relationships. So if there's a specific topic or subject that you would like to hear us talk about, definitely, absolutely let us know in the comments, and we'll get you taken care of, because that's an important thing. We're about trying to build a community that's supportive and interactive, and we want you to be engaged with us as we go through that process.
Show up for ghosting.
Show up for ghosting. Ghosting promises to be interesting. We've had some people say already, I can't wait for that. So,
we're going to learn some things.
Got to learn some things. Share some things.
Right.
Well, that's going to do it for today. As I said, thank you for joining us. Mina, thank everybody out there.
Thank you very much.
So
Please
until
return.
next time, have a great week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Take care.